Good evening, everyone. The Subcommittee on the Department of State, Foreign Operations, and Related Programs will come to order. Now, as this is a hybrid markup, we must address a few housekeeping matters first. For today's markup, the chair or staff designated by the chair may mute participants' microphones when they are not under recognition for the purposes of eliminating inadvertent background noise. Members are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves. If I have noticed that you have not unmuted yourself, I will ask if you would like the staff to unmute you. If you indicate approval by nodding, staff will unmute your microphone. After my opening statement, I will recognize Ranking Member Rogers for his opening statement, and then turn to Chair DeLauro and Ranking Member Granger for any statements they wish to make. Following that, I will recognize any members that wish to make a statement. Additionally, House rules require me to remind you that we have set up an email address to which members can send anything they wish to submit in writing at any of our hearings or markups. That email address has been provided to you in advance through your staff. Finally, before proceeding further, let me pause to acknowledge the passing of our former colleague and chair of this subcommittee, Sonny Callahan. You may not have known him, but he ably steered this subcommittee for many years, and I know was a close friend of our ranking member, Mr. Rogers. My condolences go out to his family and to Mr. Rogers. Also, let me take a moment of personal privilege and to say this is the first time I've had the privilege to chair this markup or this subcommittee, and we're in the room where my former boss, Ron Dellum, served as chair of the House Armed Services Committee. I miss him dearly. He was a close friend of Chairman Sonny Callahan also. I remember that very well. Yes, as chair of for the first time, it's really an honor to present the fiscal year 2022 State Foreign Operations and Related Programs Appropriations Bill. The bill provides $62.24 billion in new discretionary budget authority, which is $6.7 billion above the fiscal year 2021 enacted level and $62.6 million below the fiscal year 2022 request. The resources included in the bill represent much-needed investments in diplomacy and development, which have been overshadowed by the defense budgets for far too long. While we still have a long way to go, we're making progress. I commend the Biden-Harris administration and our chair, Rosa DeLauro, for recognizing the importance of these investments. The devastating COVID-19 pandemic is the latest example of how interconnected the world is and how we are only strong as the weakest country's health system. That's why the bill before us today includes $10.6 billion for global health and the prevention of future pandemics, which will support the health of families and communities around the world through both bilateral and multilateral mechanisms. These investments will bolster the surveillance, detection, and response capabilities of countries around the world and bolster health investments in childhood vaccinations, maternal health, tuberculosis, and HIV to aid their recovery from the setbacks that they suffered during the pandemic. The COVID pandemic has not only set back key health indicators, but also caused significant economic and social harm to many developing countries. The development investments in this bill are crucial to making progress towards reaching the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, including eliminating extreme poverty, achieving an AIDS-free generation, and supporting efforts to build inclusive, equitable, and accountable societies for everyone. The House bill also prioritizes the resources, programs, and policies for the protection and advancement of women. We are finally increasing funding for family planning, which has not received an increase in over a decade, and address policy inequities that prevent women from getting the care they need. Throughout my international travels during my career, I have seen firsthand that we cannot make long-term gains toward any of our other development goals while leaving out the reproductive health care needs of women. This is especially true now after a global pandemic which we know disproportionately affected women. Many of you have talked to me about concerns about girls' education after the pandemic and women in Afghanistan after U.S. troops depart. I share these concerns. The House bill maintains the United States commitment to basic education at $950 million, which is $267 million above the budget request, and directs that not less than $150 million is spent on the education of girls in conflict settings. The House bill also puts women front and center of United States engagement with Afghanistan. First, it maintains all existing requirements on the inclusion and protection of women in Afghanistan programming, peace negotiations, and political processes. Second, and most critically, the bill for the first time designates not less than $60 million to specifically support the rights and empowerment of women in the country as a demonstration of our deep commitment and concern. We are also increasing our commitment to combating the climate crisis, including a $1.6 billion contribution to the Green Climate Fund, which is the first direct appropriation for the fund. Along with an additional $1.4 billion for our other environmental programs, we will assist millions of people at greater risk of hunger, disease, and displacement due to climate change. Failing to make these types of robust investments is no longer an option. Climate change is only becoming more expensive, more dangerous, and more devastating to our planet, with deadly effects here at home and overseas. The United States must lead so that other countries will follow. The House bill continues to invest in programs that deliver needed humanitarian assistance to the record level of displaced persons globally for programs to advance democracy and human rights, and funds for partner organizations like the United Nations, the Peace Corps, the Inter-American Foundation, and the United States African Development Foundation. The bill also supports the administration's goal of rebuilding our nation's diplomatic and development workforce, one that reflects the diversity of the American people. The bill includes increased funding authority and guidance to equip the Secretary of State and U.S. Aid Administrator to increase diversity and inclusion in the nation's international affairs workforce. Now, in my role as chairwoman of this subcommittee, I'm committed to advancing real, impactful solutions to address entrenched institutional barriers to diversity. I have been fighting for years to create more opportunities for people of color and underrepresented groups in our foreign policy workforce. It's past time to enact bold, forward-leaning policy solutions. The fiscal 2022 bill is a major step toward equipping the Secretary of State and U.S. Aid Administrator to make long-lasting and measurable progress. Lastly, the House mark affirms our support for allies and partners around the world by fulfilling our MOUs with Israel and Jordan, increasing our assistance for Eastern Europe, Eurasia, and Central Asia, as well as for Central America and the Caribbean. We're also increasing our humanitarian and economic assistance for the Palestinian people and reaffirming strong support for achieving a negotiated two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We also address the needs of communities in the Caribbean and in Africa that, quite frankly, have frequently been forgotten. Our subcommittee received more than 6,500 requests from both Democrats and Republicans for our fiscal 2022 bill, and we have worked diligently to ensure that members' priorities are reflected to the greatest extent possible. I mentioned to our chair how amazed I was that we received that many requests from members throughout the House, and this shows the interest and the commitment to global development, to humanitarian assistance, and to really engaging in the world. In closing, let me just remind my colleagues that on his inauguration day, President Biden pledged that the United States would be a strong and trusted partner for peace, progress, and security with the rest of the world. And so I'm proud to say that the fiscal 2022 House mark for the State Department, Foreign Operations, and related programs backs up his commitment by providing the resources needed to turn it into a reality. One reminder before I turn to our ranking member, Rogers, given the quick timeline confronting our committee, I request that any amendments be reserved until the bill is considered by the full committee. Again, after Mr. Rogers speaks, I will recognize our chair, Rosa DeLauro, followed by our full committee ranking member, Ms. Granger. I will then recognize any member of the subcommittee who wish to speak on the bill. So, Mr. Rogers, thank you very much for your cooperation of you and your staff throughout this process. Please proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and let me congratulate you on your maiden voyage as chair of this subcommittee. You are doing a great job. We have a good working relationship with you and your staff, and but congratulations to you. It's a high honor, and you're worthy of that. Before I discuss this year's bill, permit me to take a moment to reflect on a legend of this subcommittee that you mentioned in your opening remarks, and one of my closest friends, Sonny Callahan. He served in Congress from 1985 to 2003 and chaired this subcommittee from 1995 until 2001. Peacefully passed away on Friday at the age of 88. And it's ironic that we are marking up the bill of the subcommittee that he chaired at this particular time as he lies a corpse in Mobile. Thank you for recognizing him. During his tenure, Sonny's service to Southern Alabama and American interests was immeasurable. And Sonny could not have held this subcommittee's gavel at a more difficult time. Working in a new Republican majority, one we never thought we'd see in our earlier days, and facing pressure to cut funding for foreign aid and downsize government in general, he expertly navigated challenging currents without harming U.S. interests. Sonny led with a sharp intellect, a Southern accent, steady hand, and an endearing sense of humor. His friendship meant so much to me, and his legacy will live on through the work of this subcommittee. Now back to the business at hand. I know how difficult it can be to balance member interests, so I appreciate your accommodating member priorities where you could. The bill provides $62.2 billion for the Department of State, Foreign Operations and related programs, a 12% increase over the fiscal year 2021 enacted level. I have serious concerns about the magnitude of this increase that I will address in a moment. But at first, I want to thank the chair for addressing some key priorities. The bill includes $3.3 billion for Israel. What we witnessed last month in Israel should be a wake-up call to all of us. The barrage of rocket fire was unprecedented in the 2 weeks' time that Israel was being attacked. We ought not forget the very real and dangerous threats Israel faces daily. It would also serve us well to remember why the fighting stopped when it did. In testimony before the subcommittee earlier this month, Secretary of State Blinken said, and I quote, "Egypt played an absolutely vital role in getting the ceasefire." So I thank the chair for maintaining funding for Egypt at the current level, even though I strongly disagree with additional conditions on that aid. I also appreciate the chair maintaining funding for Jordan and for countries facing Russian aggression. I was pleased to see the bill provides $1.6 billion to meet our commitments in the Indo-Pacific, including $300 million for the Countering Chinese Influence Fund. It also maintains funding to help support our ally Colombia. They're facing incredible challenges from generously hosting millions of Venezuelans fleeing poverty and tyranny, as well as the devastating impact of the pandemic on their own society and economy. New and expanded language is included on counter-narcotics that directs the State Department to expand their current efforts and explore new ways to tackle the opioid crisis that is ravaging our citizens here at home. And finally, Madam Chair, I'm pleased that the bill maintains robust funding for embassy security to help ensure our people and facilities overseas to be safe. I wish I could stop there and say this is a good bill and well done. I wish. Unfortunately, the spending increases outside of these critical areas is too great and the policy writers are too extreme. First and foremost are changes made to the long-standing measures that protect the sanctity of life. These are common sense provisions that have enjoyed bipartisan support for decades. Of greatest concern is the removal of the most important condition in any state foreign operations bill, that no funds can be used to pay for abortion. This change is unprecedented, but it doesn't stop there. The bill also includes a permanent prohibition of the Mexico City policy, weakens the Kemp-Kasten restrictions on coercive abortion, increases funding to UNFPA, and many other controversial changes. These extreme measures are the fastest way to jeopardize support for this bill. Another tough pill for the American taxpayer is the more than $3 billion included in this bill for environment programs, including a whopping $1.6 billion for the Green Climate Fund. At a time when American families continue to struggle to make ends meet and foreign aid is under great scrutiny, proposing such a significant sum of taxpayer funding for international climate change programs adds insult to injury. Funding is also dramatically increased for the United Nations, but conditions in the bill are weakened and desperately needed reforms are ignored. The absence of conditions on the World Health Organization is particularly concerning given what we all know about their complicity in covering up the COVID-19 outbreak. Finally, the bill weakens a condition carried in prior years regarding the Palestinian Authority. I believe this change will be counterproductive to resuming direct negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians. There's no chance this bill can get enacted with such extreme policy positions and misplaced funding priorities. I hope these issues can be addressed as the process moves forward through the regular operation of this subcommittee and the Congress. Before I close, let me thank the staff from both sides of the aisle, all hard workers, Susan Adams, Jamie McCormick, John Muscalini from the minority staff, and from the my personal office, Jake Johnson and Austin Gage. And from the majority staff, I want to thank Craig Higgins, the acting clerk, Aaron Kolodziejski, Celia Alvarado, Jason Wheelock, Marion Stein, Jean Kwan, and Jonathan Stivers. They've all put a lot of hours into this piece of work, and we appreciate their dedication to their duty. So, Madam Chair, thank you. Congratulations. Godspeed.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Rogers. Now I'll turn to our full committee chair, Chairwoman Rosa DeLauro.
Thank you, Chairwoman Lee and Ranking Member Rogers, for your good work on this bill and for your dedication and commitment to the subcommittee, this institution, and of course to all of your constituents. Let me just offer, a comment on Sonny Callahan, who chaired this committee and leaves a legacy behind. And I also want to offer my condolences to the ranking member, and I know that he wanted to be at the services for Congressman Callahan. And thank you for being here, but know that we understand the depth of your feeling for your colleague and your friendship with him. Thank you. You know, the appropriations process is not easy. but I deeply appreciate the long hours, the hard work you all have committed to this effort. And I say that to the staff as well. I've said in a couple of the subcommittees, our names are on the door, but it is all of you on both sides of the aisle and the staff who keep our names on the door. So we are enormously grateful for all of your work. After 4 years where the United States was often too disruptive or absent on the world stage, I am pleased that President Biden has sent a clear message: America is back. This legislation backs that message with action. It restores American leadership around the world by responding to global health threats, including the ongoing coronavirus pandemic, confronting the climate crisis, and addressing urgent humanitarian needs. As the devastation of the coronavirus has made clear, a challenge anywhere can easily become a challenge everywhere. It is only through our global connections and our relationships that we build with our allies and our partners abroad that we can begin to ensure we are adequately prepared to address the continuing coronavirus pandemic while preparing to meet future challenges. While things have improved significantly in the United States, the pandemic is far from over across the globe. In fact, we are still seeing over 370,000 new cases around the world per day and over 8,000 new deaths. As new variants develop and spread, we must continue to work across countries and borders to put an end to this pandemic while ensuring that we are prepared to prevent the pandemics of the future. That is why I am proud that this bill provides total funding of $62.2 billion. It's an increase of $6.7 billion over 2021. This 12% increase is desperately needed, especially as this bill provides $10.6 billion for global health, which is an increase of $1.4 billion to crush the COVID-19 pandemic, support family health, and prevent future pandemics. But even as we recover from this ongoing scourge of coronavirus, we must also look ahead to the existential threat of climate change, which is a problem that can only be solved through American leadership to cultivate global action. That is why it is crucial that this bill includes over $3 billion to confront the climate crisis and other environmental issues. With $1.6 billion in funding for global efforts to reduce emissions and to support the Green Climate Fund, $350 million above the request. Meanwhile, though the virus has particularly highlighted the importance of safeguarding global public health and fighting climate change, it has also underscored the need to invest in our nation's diplomatic and development initiatives. I'm deeply concerned by the threats posed by both China and Russia, and I am troubled by the wave of democratic backsliding that we are seeing in nations such as Brazil, Hungary, Poland, Turkey, and elsewhere. So I am proud of the provisions in this bill to restore American leadership as well as to support the world's most vulnerable. To that end, the bill provides $8.5 billion in assistance to meet urgent humanitarian needs, many of which have also been exacerbated by the pandemic. Finally, I would be remiss if I did not speak to the critical investments this legislation makes to advance women's rights around the world. This bill provides $760 million, an increase of $185 million for family planning, $70 million for the United Nations Population Fund. It repeals restrictions that make it harder for women around the world to access safe and legal abortion. Together, these provisions uphold the principle that women's rights are human rights and that all women, no matter what country they live in, deserve equity and equality. I am proud of the message that this bill sends to our allies and partners, and yes, even to our adversaries around the world. America is back. We are ready to lead with action. We are ready to confront the biggest challenges facing the world. Again, let me say thank you to the chairman and the ranking member of the subcommittee and the full committee staff. I urge my colleagues to support this bill. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Now I'd like to turn to our ranking member, Granger, for any comments she may have.
Madam Chair, thank you for yielding. I want to thank you and Ranking Member Rogers for your work on the State and Foreign Operations Bill for fiscal year 2022. Unfortunately, this bill, like all of the ones we have marked up so far, is based on a top-line funding level that only the majority party has agreed to. We must work together to come up with spending levels we can all support. We also must agree to drop controversial policy provisions. This bill contains some of the most troubling items yet, and I will address those specifically later in my remarks. First, there are some areas where we agree, and I want to highlight those. I want to thank the chair for including the full amount for Israel, $3.3 billion. Full funding makes it clear that the members of this committee are steadfast supporters of our great ally and partner. Funding was also maintained at the current level for other key partners in the Middle East, such as Egypt and Jordan. I hope the chair will work with us to ensure that the conditions on aid to Egypt do not prevent funding from reaching one of our most reliable partners in the region. Now I'd like to discuss some of the most troubling items in this bill. The bill includes a 12% funding increase, which is simply too high, especially because our military investments will not even keep up with inflation at the levels proposed. One example of this enormous increase in the bill is the amount for the Green Climate Fund. Funding is provided at $1.6 billion, much higher than even the president requested. This can't be justified. Unfortunately, this bill includes alarming changes to long-standing language to protect the unborn. Language that prohibits foreign aid from being used to pay for abortions was dropped entirely. This is the first time such an extreme position has been taken in this bill, and this shift in policy is going to be widely opposed by members on my side of the aisle. The bill also includes a permanent repeal of the Mexico City policy and other controversial changes. Moving forward in this way could jeopardize the bipartisan support that global health programs have had for so many years. Finally, the bill weakens an important provision that has been carried unchanged for many years. This language has held Palestinian leadership accountable for going to the United Nations and the International Crime Court to advance their anti-Israel agenda. Modifying it sends the wrong signal at an important time in the Middle East. Those kinds of partisan funding proposals and highly controversial policy riders must be addressed as the appropriations process moves forward. Having chaired this subcommittee, I know how important these programs are. We're going to have to make significant changes to get support from members on both sides of the aisle and get a bill signed into law. We have a lot of work to do and not much time to complete it, and I thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Ms. Granger. At this point now, I'd like to open the floor to any member who would like to be recognized for short comments about the bill. Please raise your hand, and I will call on those members wishing to be recognized. Mr. Espaillat.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Ranking Member, for hosting this markup and for working with myself and really the entire committee to put forward this bill, which I believe can make us all proud. After an unprecedented year for our country and the world, strong American leadership is vital to face the many challenges and opportunities ahead. I want to particularly highlight the vital funding that is included to our third border, the Caribbean, whose prosperity and success is intrinsically tied to our very own. This bill provides $80 million to the Caribbean Basin Security Initiative, boosting programs to combat transnational crime and violence, increase public safety, promote justice sector reforms, support anti-corruption programs, and uplift at-risk youth. It also increases cooperation on neonatal and maternal health that will assist these countries in providing for women and babies who desperately need health care and support. An additional $15 million for disasters resilience in the Caribbean, as well as funding for the Inter-American Foundation, will help our neighbors build stronger infrastructure in the face of increasing hurricanes due to climate change. Our climate change is an existential crisis of our time. This bill makes an outstanding commitment of $3.2 billion to support our natural environment and mitigate and adapt the threats of climate change. This action includes $1.6 billion for the Green Climate Fund, a step towards making up our $2 billion debt, and a new American leadership on climate financing and global environmental justice. Funding for clean energy programs, adoption programs, sustainable landscape programs, and much more ensure we are working with our partners across the globe to support frontline communities in the face of climate change. This bill does so much more, Madam Chair, in addressing root causes of migration in the Northern Triangle to uplifting women, children, and indigenous communities. I look forward to continue our work on this matter to ensure the United States is against a trustworthy leader in the global stage. I thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Now I will yield to Mr. Diaz-Balart.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman. Congratulations to you, because putting a bill like this is a lot of work. People don't necessarily understand how much work you have to put into it, so congratulations on the first bill of this subcommittee. And again, it's already been mentioned to all the staff that does an amazing job. We're blessed in this committee to have an amazing group of professionals, and to all of you, thank you. Actually, Madam Chairwoman, the full committee ranking member and the subcommittee ranking member pretty much took all my thunder. But if I may, let me just throw out a couple of issues. I'm obviously pleased to see some of the work in this bill, particularly the MOU, the full funding of the MOU to Israel. It's crucial for Israel's security and also for our national security interests. And part of that delicate balance that has been reached in the Middle East includes providing important funding for strategic partners, obviously for Israel, Egypt, and Jordan. As was already mentioned, I also am concerned about some of the language withholding foreign military assistance and financing from Egypt, and I look forward to working with you, Madam Chairwoman, on ways that we can make sure that Israel has the funds necessary, particularly when we know that they have some interesting neighbors, whether it's their border with Libya, Sudan, Hamas, and Gaza, not to mention ISIS and others in the region. So I look forward to working with you, Madam Chairwoman, and I think a very important part. We need to build on the success that was the Abrams Accords, and I think we can do so. Already was mentioned the issue of the protection of the unborn, which I think is a non-starter for so many of us. Other issue was the top-line number. While we're looking at a 12% increases, then there are areas, for example, where, like OCB, for example, where funding is inadequate. So I look forward to working with you, Madam Chairwoman, and the entire committee on making sure that this bill that I know you've put a lot of effort, a lot of time into, can improve so that we can hopefully get a bill that goes to the President's desk. With that, I yield back, and congratulations, Madam Chairwoman.
Are there any additional members who would like to make a statement? No? Okay. If not, first of all, let me thank everyone for your comments, for your support, or not, but for working with us to make sure that we had a bill that I think the administration, that reflects the administration's agenda and values as we move forward. I want to just take a moment also to recognize our staffs, our personal staffs, committee staffs, both majority and minority, and just say, as I mentioned when I started speaking earlier, that we're in the room where my former boss of 11 years and my predecessor served as chair. And I know the work that staff puts into these bills because I was a chief of staff. And I just want to say to everyone that this has been quite an amazing moment for myself personally, but also for the committee and for the committee staffs to work together, regardless of our differences. And I know that Ron Dellums would be very proud of everybody here on staff and how they conducted this bill in putting it together, but also how they respected each other's points of views and how they collaborated and really brought together what I think is a very remarkable and transformative bill. So there being no amendments, let me just recognize Ms. Meng, can you hear us for a motion?
Yes, I can, Madam Chairwoman. I move that the bill be favorably reported to the full committee.
The question is on agreeing to the motion. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed?
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. If there is no further business, I ask unanimous consent that staff be allowed to make technical and conforming changes to the bill and to the report. Thank you all very much once again. On a final note, please leave the bill and report on the table for a subcommittee staff to collect. So the subcommittee stands adjourned.